Again. So we were learning yesterday. We had the review of the stories of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Hillel HaZaken, all the great wondrous things that these great rabbis were capable of, stopping the sun. Shemesh V'Givon Dayan, capable of doing like Joshua did, and capable of receiving the Shechina like Moshe Rabbeinu. And then you have Beinanim, the in between levels, and incredible things. The greatness of Yonasan ben Uziel, that whenever he studied Torah, the birds would be burnt up. And we had Rashi learned it had to do with the fact that the angels would cause them to burn up. Seems like some type of in other words, in addition to being a spiritual fire, it seems like maybe the angels have had a physical fire as well. It would cause the birds to burn up. Taisus had an understanding that it had to do with the fact that it's similar to receiving the Torah. It's Sinai. That's how Rabbi Yonasan ben Uziel would learn Torah. That's how that's how his learning was on such a level that it would cause it to also be with fire, similar to when he got the Torah at Har Sinai. So,
Rabbi, is that also when Moshe Rabbeinu was afraid when Hashem told him hold on to the Kisei Kavod? He was afraid because he said they're going to burn me up, the angels.
Right. So
I'm wondering if it's a similar, if it's related.
I have to look up the Medrash, but I remember the Medrash. Right. I have to look it up and see if that's was he afraid of the fire of the angels? That's what he said, that they're going to burn him up. So I guess that would be the meaning then, right? In other words, the angels naturally are fire. In any event, we'll have to. It sounds right. Sounds right. Good call. Okay, so we're up to the Mishnah, and we're going to be starting here. I guess we'll just start with the Mishnah on page 28a. The Mishnah must be about 20 lines up to the bottom of the page, maybe 18 lines from the bottom of the page. So 28a, the Mishnah. Mishnah says, Mishaya Reishav Ruba Sukkah. Person had his head and his majority of his body in the sukkah, but he has his table is in the house. So the problem with this sukkah is that we're nervous, or potentially an issue of a person leaning towards his table instead of sitting in the sukkah. So Beis Shammai is paislim. Beis Shammai says it's possible. You're not allowed to do that. You can't eat in such a sukkah with your if you're using the table that's inside the house. That's a problem. You're going to end up leaning towards the table, and you're not going to be eating in the sukkah. Beis Hillel says it's kosher. It's not a problem. Beis Hillel wasn't worried. Wasn't there a story where the elders of Beis Shammai and the elders of Beis Hillel went Levakir to visit as Rabbi Yochanan ben Achiranis? They went to visit Rabbi Yochanan Achiranis, and seemingly Achiranis there's another Girsa ben Hachirani. Seems like the place he was from Beis Choron. So Beis Choron, I don't know if there is such a place now, but Cholon, there's a place. Beis Choron, I don't know, but anyway, there was a place like that, and he was from that place. So the Beis Hillel told Beis Shammai, isn't there a story that the elders of Beis Shammai went with the elders of Beis Hillel to visit Rabbi Yochanan ben Achidanis, and they found him that his head and the majority of his body was in the sukkah. And they didn't say anything. They didn't protest. They didn't tell him that you're doing the wrong thing. So you see that it's kosher. Beis Shammai says, you want to bring a proof from there? That's not a proof. They did tell him if this is how you did things, you're accustomed to do this mitzvah. Mitzvah sukkah miyamecha, you have not fulfilled the mitzvah of sukkah in your life. So yesterday we spoke a little about the fact that what do they mean by making this very strong statement? If you do this, you never fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah in your whole life. This is what you would call a rabbinic decree. It's a rabbinic decree. The rabbis were nervous someone's going to have their table in their house. They're going to end up leaning towards the table, and possibly some food they're going to eat when they're leaning, maybe sufficient enough to be transgressed, not dwelling in the sukkah properly. Okay, fine. So the rabbis made a decree: don't do it this way. But why would you say that you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah of sukkah? That's a quite a strong term, and it's not necessarily correct, because seemingly you fulfilled the mitzvah of sukkah, but you didn't fulfill the rabbis' rules, that the rabbis are nervous that you might end up doing something. It might lead you to not fulfilling the mitzvah of sukkah, but still you fulfilled the mitzvah of sukkah. So we spoke about this yesterday. Yes, David.
Is there something in Gemara like a hyperbole in English? Like a person says something that's like an exaggeration, and everybody knows it's not to be taken literally.
Yeah. So yesterday I mentioned that the Ran and maybe others, I think the Ritva as well, both learn this, that it means you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah of sukkah kara'oi, properly. You haven't done it. You haven't fulfilled the mitzvah in the most appropriate way, properly. You haven't done it in the proper way, man. But you have so I guess that's that's what you're saying, right? That it would be like it's more of an exaggerated word. You should add the word properly. Yeah,
Rabbi.
Yes, Victor.
Question on the wording is: are they saying you doing what you're doing is invalid, or the sukkah itself is invalid? Because it sounds like they're saying the fact that table is outside of the sukkah. The way they're wording it, it's like the sukkah itself is what's not valid. And then their comment is, you never did the mitzvah of sukkah. So like it's like confusing the way they're wording it.
Yeah. Which word are you referring to? That's knocking. That's not knocking off the simple understanding. Is it the poislin and machshirin?
It says the Beit Shammai say it's
poislin.
Unfit. That's right. So what are they postling? They're postling the person, or the sukkah? It's not clear what they mean.
Right. So the thing is that what you're saying is correct. And the Gemara dealt with this. We're on page 28. The Gemara dealt with this on page 3. So you got to go back how many months? 4 or 5 months that we've been learning. So 4 or 5 months ago, we dealt with that issue, specifically that issue. And the Gemara there said that there really are 2 debates going on. The Mishnah sounds like one, but it's really 2. And the 2 debates are, what happens if you have a small sukkah and the sukkah doesn't have enough space for a table? So it's only like 6 handbreadths by 6 handbreadths. So that would be one case where Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argue. And then you have another case where the sukkah is a big sukkah, but the table is not in the sukkah. You're actually sitting at the edge of the table, but it's out. The table itself is outside the sukkah. So because they were talking about two different cases, one case it's appropriate to use the term that the sukkah is invalid, and the other place it's appropriate to use the concept of lo kiyamta, you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah of sukkah, because your fulfillment of the mitzvah is missing in the way you fulfilled it, at least rabbinically and maybe even biblically. So yeah, so in other words, your point is well taken. It's discussed there on page 3. So right. The bottom line is now what really gets interesting, because the halacha is who do we paskin? When it comes to a small sukkah, we actually follow Beis Shammai. When it comes to a small sukkah, what's the minimum size? 7 by 7, not 6 by 6. 7 handbreadths by 7 handbreadths. So we actually follow Beis Shammai. So the question is, if both of these debates are dependent on each other, does that mean that the halacha follows Beis Shammai also in a big sukkah? Or do we say that maybe the debates are not necessarily dependent on each other, and normally we're supposed to follow Beis Hillel, and then when it comes to a big sukkah, you could fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah with sitting at the edge of a table where the table is outside the sukkah and you are inside the sukkah. Anyway, so it's a topic of a discussion among the halachic authorities, and maybe we'll look it up in Shulchan Aruch. Maybe tomorrow, maybe we'll bring the Shulchan Aruch. But in the meantime, that's a little of some memories from Daf Gimel from page 3. So anyway, getting back to over here. So there's a debate between the commentaries as to, have you fulfilled the mitzvah biblically? Did you fulfill the mitzvah? There is a rabbinic decree. Does that mean that you've fulfilled the mitzvah on a biblical level and you just haven't fulfilled it on the rabbinic level? In other words, let's pick the case where the sukkah is a large sukkah and you have a table right outside your sukkah and you're sitting near that table. Now, are you for sure eating outside the sukkah? No. But there's room for suspicion that you might lean over and eat outside the sukkah. So did you do anything 100% wrong? No, you might. This is a protection. The rabbis made a decree, at least according to Beis Shammai, the rabbis made a decree that you shouldn't fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah this way. So the Ran learns, that's the rabbinic decree. You didn't fulfill the mitzvah properly by sitting in the sukkah and having a table right next to you where you're sitting next to it. You might end up, you didn't fulfill the mitzvah properly. But Tosfos actually learns, not here, but Tosfos on page 3, Tosfos over there deals with the fact that you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah. He learns this literally. You have not fulfilled the mitzvah at all, because for some reason, the rabbis have the power to take away the mitzvah, even though you did the mitzvah on a biblical level. But when the rabbis add their qualifications to how the mitzvah has to be performed, they have the right, they have the ability to actually cause your mitzvah not to be considered a mitzvah if you didn't fulfill it in the way they explained it. And that's the way Tosfos seems to learn over there. And of course, the later commentaries, of course, fight over how to explain Tosfos. How do you explain that? What's the mechanism, and what's the mechanism that causes the rabbis? What mechanism did the rabbis use to take away your mitzvah? There must be some vehicle that they've used, some halachic path that they've taken to be able, that they've used, that they're able to do such a thing. Which where is the license to do that? What license are they presenting in order to remove the mitzvah from you? You've done a mitzvah on a biblical level, and the rabbi said, okay, we want you to do it this way. And not only we want you to do it this way, but we're taking away the mitzvah that you did. It's not considered a mitzvah. I mean, I did it. I did what the Torah says. I sat in a sukkah. I ate in a sukkah. You're taking it away. I actually didn't bend over the table. I have a video afterwards, and it shows that I didn't bend over the table. And I'm looking. I watched the video. There was no bending over. Nevertheless, Tosfos holds no. You didn't fulfill the mitzvah at all. And so the mechanism, the rabbis, as I was saying, the rabbis do debate about what the license the rabbis have, which license they're using. There's a concept that a bezdin has hefker bezdin. Hefker bezdin could make your sukkah ownerless. So maybe they did that. They used that method to make your sukkah not a mitzvah. They made your sukkah ownerless. But then we asked on that yesterday. But who says you have to own your sukkah? Even if you don't know, even if they make your sukkah ownerless, doesn't mean that you don't fulfill the mitzvah. According to the rabbis, you fulfill the mitzvah even on a sukkah that you don't own. So that would be problematic with that answer. Then there's another understanding that the rabbis have the right based on lois sosur. You're not allowed to go. You're not allowed to go away from what the rabbis have teach you, right? Don't go away from that's what gives them the power to make rabbinic decrees. So there is a concept that anything that the Torah says not to do, if you did it, it's not fulfilled. So in other words, it's possible to say that when the rabbis make a decree that they actually take away your mitzvah from you if you did it in the wrong way. And there is a concept here as well that some want to say that if the rabbis say you're not allowed to sit there in that way, it makes it that sitting in such a position is called it's not called a yeshivas keva, a normal sitting now. Once the rabbis prohibit you to sit like that, it's not called a proper dwelling. You're called the dira strucha. That's a very interesting way of interesting take on this, because normally you would think that has to be on a practical level, not on a halachic level. In other words, a dira srucha means a disgusting or uncomfortable dwelling. So once the rabbis prohibit you, you would think that's a physical thing, that if you're dwelling in a dwelling that's uncomfortable. To dira srucha, it's like a disgusting dwelling. That would be something physical. Then you could say you didn't fulfill the mitzvah proper. You didn't fulfill the mitzvah because
warm up some, or shall I eat an egg? Warm up.
I'm gonna mute everyone. Mute everyone. So here the Aruch Laner wants to say that once the rabbis prohibit this type of dwelling in the sukkah, it makes it that it's considered a dira srucha, that it's considered like a disgusting dwelling, that you can't fulfill the mitzvah of dwelling properly, and you're not going to be able to be yotze the mitzvah. What that exactly means, I'm not 100% sure how to explain that. But why would it be called a dira srucha just because the rabbis prohibit it? It's almost like a spiritual uncomfortable element to it. And what happens if you didn't know that the rabbis prohibited that? Then was it still uncomfortable? Was it still a dira srucha if you didn't know? So maybe if you know that it's not allowed by the rabbis and you do it anyway, but you're going to feel uncomfortable. So maybe that you could say is called like a spiritual dira srucha, a spiritual uncomfort. But here, if you don't know, maybe how could you say that you're uncomfortable? You don't even know that the rabbis prohibited such a thing. But in any event, there definitely is room to say that the rabbis have the right, have the ability to take away the mitzvah, and for whatever reason they chose to do it here. Interestingly enough, Tosfos does have one other case where he compares this to, and that is when you say Shema and you specifically like lie down to fulfill the mitzvah like Beis Shammai and b'shach b'cha when you lie down, and you do it that way, so you don't fulfill the mitzvah, according to Tosfos. Now, Tosfos holds that that means literally you have not fulfilled the mitzvah, and you would need to repeat Shema, and so that would be a similar scenario where the rabbis took away your mitzvah from you. Anyway, so that's the discussion in the later commentaries.
Does that mean if you stand up in the morning and you
and you specifically stand to fulfill the mitzvah of Shema like Beis Shammai, you have that in mind? Would seem, I'd have to look it up in Shulchan Aruch what Shulchan Aruch says, but this would be the opinion of Tosfos. You know what I mean? When you learn the Gemara, you get the commentaries and the Rishonim, but not all the Rishonim agree on everything. And so you really need to check Shulchan Aruch when it comes to the practical side of it. But the fact that there is such a view, there is.
Okay.
So the other issue that's discussed over here is a famous question that's often asked on Gemara. One of that question is, how could the rabbis argue about a fact? About if they want to argue about halacha, that's fine. That makes sense. This one understands it that way. This one understands it this way. They can argue. Well, there's no limit to the arguments you could have in halacha. But how about arguing on a story? This is a story that happened. So these rabbis said that no one protested, and the other rabbis said, "Yeah, we told them off." They afhei mamrulai. They said afhei mamrulai. They did tell them off. So how could they argue? It's called an argument b'metzius, on the facts, on what happened. You can't really argue. You can't have a rabbinic debate on something that happened. You have a debate on halacha, on how to interpret something, but on a fact, how can the rabbis debate on something that happened? So on a very simple level, this story would be that case. Would be that if you look at it simply, it's the Beis Hillel claims no one told Rabbi Yochanan ben Hachiranis off. No one told him off. And Beis Shammai says, yes, we did tell him off. So
it be that this is they heard this story in other words, one heard the story one way and somebody else heard the story another way, but then nobody was really there to know exactly what happened. It's like I heard the story like this, and the other guy says, no, I heard the story like this. So I mean, we have cases like that in Gemara, right?
Right. So if it's about how they heard the story, that's definitely that gives us a little understanding. Another pshat is that the elders of Beis Hillel left before the elders of Beis Shammai. So it could be that Beis Shammai didn't tell them off right away. They were waiting for the right moment, maybe to say what they wanted to. In the meantime, Beis Hillel left, and Beis Shammai was still there, and they told him so. It's possible. It's possible that it happened afterwards, and it didn't happen. It didn't happen right when they arrived or something like that. So that's one of the ways the commentaries explain how this could have happened. In any event, what we have here is a story where there was a rabbi that was dwelling in a sukkah that was Roshei Verubai in the sukkah, and his table was in his house. You do have a case where it happened. That they all agree on. There was a rabbi that had it this way. Whether they told him off or not is another story. But there is such a case, and Beis Hillel seems to use it. Now, they use it as a proof. Now, it's also interesting to note that this is one of the proofs. we paskin like Beis Hillel. The house of Hillel is the halacha follows. Why does the halacha follow Hillel? The halacha follows Hillel, even though Beis Shammai was known to be smarter, sharper, in a certain sense than Beis Hillel, but Beis Hillel was known to be more humble. And where do we see that Beis Hillel was more humble? From this story. They repeat the story, and they say, not that we went to visit Rabbi Yochanan and Beis Shammai, but they mentioned Beis Shammai first. The elders of Shammai went, and the elders of Hillel, that they are respectful and careful to bring mention their so to speak competition. They mention them first. They mention them first, even before before themselves. And so we see that they had this element of humility. And I just want to share with you a thought that I heard that adds a little taste and understanding. When you mention Beis Shammai before Beis Hillel, even though it's Beis Hillel talking and they're mentioning Beis Shammai, so we're going to paskin like them. Just because they're humble, you're going to paskin like them. So that's very nice. They were humble. But the thing is, the halacha follows the way this world, the way humans in this world think. And we have to take everything into consideration and come to the final conclusion. That's how you give a psak. You have to really take all matters, all understandings, and decide this is the right way to see it. If Beis Hillel took the position of Beis Shammai and they always respected them, that means that they looked into their view to the utmost to understand their views before they mentioned their own. That's why we're going to paskin like that. So, of course, there's a nice shot to say that they're humble, and that's good enough reason that the halacha they're going to merit to come to the right answer because of their humility. That's one way of looking at it. But there's another way that's a little more logical, and that is that because they took Beis Shammai's view, so they had respect for Beis Shammai, they for sure would look into their view before they came to their own, which means that they did their research, they did their homework properly. Not necessarily is everyone going to do not necessarily do people always do that. Do they really look at the other view? They decide what they think, and that's the psak. Here we have Beis Hillel looking into Beis Shammai. They're respecting Beis Shammai to that extent, so it adds a little more of a logical twist to it, why the halacha would follow Beis Hillel. But of course, the other pshat is also a pshat that humility does lead you to the correct answer. Yes, Victor.
So isn't this the approach that when a person is seeking emet, a person who's not seeking emet, they only care about is I'm right and you're wrong. Person who's seeking emet, they don't care who's going to be the one that reaches the conclusion. They want emet, and emet is that's it. And I heard this from Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, but that's the midah of seeking the emet is to listen to the other opinions, and whoever's right is right. That's fine. Doesn't matter.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it adds a little extra to this. Yes. Good addition. So anyway, the bottom line is that this is a story where you see Beis Hillel giving respect to Beis Shammai, and ultimately that's why the halacha follows Beis Hillel in most cases. Okay, so the Mishnah continues and says, Nashim ba'avadim uktanim, women, slaves, and children, Peturim and Sukkah are exempt. They're exempt from the Sukkah. What type of slave are we talking about? We're talking about a Eved Kenani, a non-Jewish slave. That's sort of like an in-between state where they have to do mitzvahs like women, and therefore it mentions that they are exempt. Patur min sukkah. Katan she'enoi tzarech limai, a child that doesn't need his mother, chayiv besukkah. He's obligated in sukkah, and of course, the interesting topic about a child is always a question: is that an obligation on the child, or is it an obligation on the father, or maybe even an obligation on the mother? But there is, of course, discussion about whenever you talk about chinuch, who has the mitzvah of chinuch, who is the mitzvah of education, is it placed? In other words, there's a mitzvah for children to do mitzvahs. And part of it is preparing the child for when he becomes an adult. So is that a mitzvah on the child, which could be, he's preparing, he's practice. It's called the practice run. There's could also be that the parent is obligated in giving in teaching and educating the child. So it would be an obligation on the parent, especially on the father, mainly on the father. We did see, and I don't remember where, but we did see where there's a Rashi that mentions about the mother. I don't remember if it was in Chagiga, but I have to look it up. But there was a Rashi somewhere where he mentioned the mitzvah of chinuch, and he mentions about the mother, interestingly enough. Okay, so in any event, so we have here that the women, slaves, and children are exempt, and but a child that doesn't need his mother is going to be obligated. So a child is not a blanket rule. It depends what stage, how mature the child is. Different children might reach this level of maturity at a different age. Okay, and now the Mishnah continues and says, "Ma'isa v'yolda kalose shel Shammai hazaken upiches es hamaziv." There's a story that the daughter-in-law of Shammai gave birth, and what did Shammai do? He decides, we got to do Sukkah. Child, we got to do the mitzvah of Sukkah. So he goes and starts taking off the roof. Piches es hamaziva. He takes off from the roof. That he removed stuff from the roof. In other words, some type of the roofing materials that were on the roof. Different. It's called the maziva. Interesting. Maziva is like some type of thing they smear on the roof. And there was also a rake that they called the maziva as well. The maziva, it's a maziv b'maziva. I think there's a Mishnah in Makos talks about they would use this type of a leveler, some type of thing that would level, that would rake, it would even it out somehow. Or it would be easy to smear it anyway. So the maziva, that's basically the roof. So he removed the roof or part of the roof, and he put schach v'sikech al gabe amita, put a schach on top of the bed, b'shvil koton, in order for the child. So he wanted the child to dwell in a sukkah. They're talking about a little baby who was just born, a newborn, and that's a very interesting concept here, because normally you think of chinuch as a practical element of educating the child. This type of chinuch sounds more like a spiritual hope that this will impact the child, like in a spiritual way. The fact that because the child is not really going to, I'm just sharing with you a thought. The child is not necessarily remembering. I don't think he's remembering that he dwelled in a sukkah. If you did this to a child that's I don't know, 5-year-old, 5-year-old that needs his mother, so he's putter, but he's dwelling in a sukkah because you want to be machmir, that I could understand that you're doing some type of an education because he's going to remember it. Here, that's very interesting that he's putting schach on top of a newborn. And this is this is Beis Shammai's chumrah. I understand it's a chumrah. We'll see in the Gemara that it sort of like contradicts the previous statement, and the Gemara explains that he was machmir. But this is quite a chumrah. Maybe we'll see in the Gemara. We'll have to see what the Gemara says about it. Okay, so now we're up to the Gemara, and the Gemara starts with a question: Minohani mili. From where do we know these words? How do we know that the women are exempt from Sukkah? So Gemara says the Tana Rabbanan, because the rabbis taught in a brisa. What does the brisa say? Pasuk says, all that are residents amongst Yidden dwell in the Sukkah. Ezrach. So it says, Kol ha-Ezrach, all the residents. It really says ha-Ezrach. So the Gemara says, Ezrach. When it says the word Ezrach without the hay, it would be Ze Ezrach, that would be include any resident of Klal Yisrael. He has to dwell in a Sukkah. And the fact that it has ha-Ezrach, the extra hay, so what does that teach us? Lahoitzi yasanashim. That extra hay is going to exclude the women from Sukkah. Now, what do we learn from the word kol? Kol ha'ezrach. All is also inclusive. Not also. All is inclusive. The rabbis esaktanim, that would include the children, that they would be obligated in Sukkah. So the Ezrach is excluding. The Ezrach is excluding women because it says ha Ezrach, only the real resident, maybe like excluding one segment of residents. But it also says all. All is a very inclusive word. So all would include even children that they would be obligated in a sukkah. And of course, we'll have to see what that refers to, what type of children, which children are obligated. But that would be the understanding. This is the brisa that gives us an understanding of how we're learning it from the psukim, that a woman is exempt, a child, the brisa continues and mentions that a child is obligated. Amar Mar, master said, we just learned in this brisa, ha Ezrach, that it says the letter hey, the extra hey, that's lo hoitzias anoshim. When it says the Ezrach, that is excluded, the resident is obligated in Sukkah, that excludes Noshim, women. That excludes women. Lememra, the Ezrach, Bein Noshim, Bein Gavri, Mashma. Does that mean to say, do you mean to say that if it just said Ezrach without the letter Hey, without the word the, just says residents, that would include whether women or men, both, it would include both. And when you add the hey, you are excluding. But without the hey, you're Ezrach literally means both, any resident. Is that what you mean to say? V'hatanya, but didn't we teach in a brisa? Wasn't it taught in a brisa about Yom Kippur where it uses the same word? Ha-Ezrach over there. Ha-Ezrach says the Ezrach. L'rabbis es hanoshim ha-Ezrachiyos shechayavos v'inoi, that it teaches us that women, residents, are obligated in painting themselves on Yom Kippur. So we see from here that Alma Ezrach is Gavri Mash. We see from here that Ezrach would mean only men, and the letter Hey actually is inclusive, and it's adding that the Ezrach, that it's adding another element, another segment, which would be the women. And so the Gemara is bothered with the fact that about Sukkah, we took it the opposite way. We said Ezrach itself is inclusive, and Ha-Ezrach is excluding something, is making an exception. The way the Gemara understands it, or the Brisa, I should say, understands it with regard to the law of Yom Kippur, is that Ezrach itself only applies to men, and the hay is including women. So it's exactly the opposite of the way we are understanding the word Ezrach or Ha-Ezrach with regard to Sukkah, where we can't play. You can't play this type of game where, if it has to be the same rules. You can't just over here. We'll say we'll add it. We'll say that it includes women. There, we'll say it excludes women. There must be some protocol. There must be some policy of the rules of what does Ezrach mean, and they have it. You add a hey. Does that include something, or does that exclude something? If you say the resident, is that inclusive or is that excluding something? So that's the Gemara. That's what the Gemara is bothered with. But the Gemara says, Amar Rabba. Rabba says, Hilchasoninu. This is a halacha l'Moshe miSinai, and v'asmechinu rabbanan akroi, and the rabbis have based it on verses. What does this mean? So the answer that Rabba wants to give is that these two laws, you can't really take an understanding from the psukim, because you definitely, one of them is obviously not the correct way of darshaning, because if the letter hey means to add, then both of them have to add something. If the letter hey means to exclude, then both of them have to exclude something. So what is the story here? It's a halacha l'Moshe miSinai that we're supposed to learn the rule in one way, and because of that, we're just gonna use the pasuk as sort of like a hint. But one of them, in other words, one of these laws is really not based on the pasuk. It's based on the halacha l'Moshe miSinai. We have a tradition. Okay, the rabbis like to connect it to a pasuk. They included it in the they added the pasuk there as if we're learning it from the pasuk. We're not learning it from that verse. They mentioned the verse because the rabbis like to sort of like link it up to a verse, but that's not the actual meaning of the verse. It's the halacha l'Moshe miSinai teaches us one of these halachas. I'm being very vague. I didn't tell you which halacha. The reason is because that's the next Gemara's question. Hi krav, hi hilchasa. So which one is actually learned from the pasuk, and is the right way to decipher the verse, to explain the verse, and which one is a halacha l'Moshe miSinai? Hi hilchasa. Which one is a halacha l'Moshe miSinai is learned as a tradition that we got from Moses? Again, what the Gemara is answering, Rabbah's answering, is that you have a good point. You can't learn one time it says the letter hey, which means the resident, that it's going to be inclusive, and the other time it says Ezrach, the resident, to be excluding something. You have to decide, does the letter hey mean to be inclusive or to be excluding something? And therefore, the Rabbah says no. One of them is correct, and the other one is a halacha l'Moshe miSinai, and the rabbis just basically attach the pasuk to it to make it. The rabbis like to always lean things and connect things to a pasuk, to a verse. So they mention this verse, but it's not the real. It's not the source. The real source is a halacha l'Moshe miSinai. Okay. So the Gemara says, "Hi krab, hi hilchasa." So which one is which? Vesu, and furthermore, kra lamali and hilchasa lam. Furthermore, why do we need a pasuk, and why do we need a halacha l'Moshe miSinai? Why would we need? The law actually sounds logical. Think about it. does a sukkah sound like a mitzvah that women should be obligated in? Does Yom Kippur sound like a mitzvah that women should be exempt from? If you think logically, we don't really need a pasuk. The sukkah is one of those mitzvahs that's dependent on time. Women should be exempt. Women are patur. I need a whole pasuk. It falls into the regular category that we have a rule about women, that women are exempt. Yom Kippur, we have a rule that when it comes to punishments and when it comes to negative commandments, women are obligated in all of them. When it comes to positive mitzvahs, women are exempt. They're shofar, they're not. They're exempt from davening, from certain parts of davening at least, and other mitzvahs, positive mitzvahs. They have to wear tefillin. They're exempt from saying Shema before the third hour, before the end of the third hour. They're exempt on the time mitzvahs, positive, but negative mitzvahs and punishment, things that are connected to punishments, which are negative commandments, they're not exempt from. They have to keep they're not allowed to eat treif. They're not allowed, they have to keep the laws of prohibitions of Shabbos and so on, and all of the typical laws, prohibitions, they're obligated. So wouldn't it make sense that they're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur? That would make sense. It's part of the rules of Yom Kippur is you're not allowed to eat. It would make sense that women would be included in that law. So the Gemara is asking that maybe we don't even need either of these. One, you're telling me, is a halacha l'Moshe, some tradition we have from Moshe. What do we need the tradition for? We would automatically say that's the law. And what do we need a pasuk to tell me? Well, that one of them is either obligated or exempt. It seems obvious to us even without this verse. We could have already told you that that in one case you're exempt. A woman is exempt from sukkah. Of course she's exempt. It's a mitzvah seishas man grama. I could have told you that. We don't need a pasuk that's going to teach me that a woman is exempt from sukkah. It's a mitzvah saseh. It's a positive commandment that is dependent on time, and all women are always patur. So let's read it inside. Sukkah mitzvah saseh shazman grama. Sukkah is a mitzvah, a positive commandment, shazman grama, that's dependent on time. And the kol mitzvah saseh shazman grama, any positive mitzvah that is dependent on time, nashim b'turais, women are exempt. So we automatically know that a woman should be exempt from sukkah, not because of your pasuk or your halacha l'Moshe Messina. And the same thing as Yom Kippur. Also, we should know the law of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, mid Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav Nafka. We learn it from the statement that Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav says. The Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, v'chein Tana Dvei Rabbi Yishmael, and so was it taught in the base medrash of Rabbi Yishmael. Amar Kra, the pasuk says, as regarding someone stole and then he swore falsely. The pasuk says, Isha, a man or a woman. And the Gemara, the teaching of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, he gives this teaching that this is a lesson that we take with us throughout the Torah. Hish v'hakosav ish leisha l'chol oinshin shebat Torah. That the Torah connects all cases of punishment that men and women will be obligated. The Torah teaches us here, when it says Isha, that although there's an exception for some of the rules, women are not obligated in time-limited mitzvahs, which makes sense based on the expectation of a woman to be involved in her household and making sure that everything that's in the household needed. So because of that, Hashem doesn't obligate women with positive mitzvahs. Nevertheless, when it comes to negative commandments, the women are just as obligated as men. And and that is this teaching, because it says isha, which gives almost like a rule that we use throughout the Torah, that hishra kosev ish isha leish l'chol einshin shebetorah, that when it comes to all punishments and warnings in the Torah, the even if they're dependent on time, but nevertheless, women are included. So this is the question that the Gemara asks about these two laws. So again, what we're dealing with is the law of Sukkah and the law of Yom Kippur, and one of them seems to be included. One of them is including women. One of them is excluding women. And we're learning it from Psukim and from Halacha L'Moshe Sinai. And the Gemara asks that it seems like it should be obvious what the law should be in both of these cases. So Amar Abaye says, Lioilam Sukkah Hilchasa. Lioilam, for really, Sukkah Hilchasa. Sukkah is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. What do you mean? Why do we need a halacha l'Moshe Sinai? Sukkah is obvious. A woman is exempt. No. The itztrich, and it's needed to, we need this halacha l'Moshe Sinai to tell me this. We need a tradition from Moshe at Sinai to tell you, guess what? Women are obligated in Sukkah because Sal Kadai Chamina. It would have gone up in my mind to say, Teishvu Kein Taduru, that you're supposed to dwell in the Sukkah the way you dwell normally in your house. And Madira Ish V'ishta, just like in your house, the proper way of dwelling is a man dwells with his wife. Doesn't necessarily mean in the same bed, because the law is not only talking about when she is pure. This law would apply even when she is impure. Nevertheless, the normal thing is that a man is in the same room as his wife. Af sukkah ish v'ishtai. A sukkah also would be that the man and the woman are sleeping together in the sukkah, at least in the same room. And kamashba, so you would think that there would be, since you're supposed to dwell in the sukkah the way you dwell in your house, so it would make sense to say that a woman would be obligated in sukkah. And this way you would dwell in the sukkah properly. Dwell in the sukkah the way you dwell in your house. And because of that, I would think a woman is obligated to go to sukkah, dwell in the sukkah. Kamash Balon comes the halacha l'Moshe Sinai and tells me no, that although you have to dwell in the sukkah the way you dwell in your house, nevertheless, a woman is exempt. She doesn't have to be part of that. She doesn't have to, you need to dwell in the sukkah the way you dwell in your house. But a woman doesn't mean that the woman is going to be obligated just because you have such an obligation. You're obligated. Okay, you gotta dwell in the sukkah the way you dwell in your house. Is your wife obligated? No, she's exempt. The halacha l'Moshe Sinai tells me she's exempt. What do you mean? How do I dwell in the sukkah without my wife? I'm not dwelling the way I'm dwelling in my house. Doesn't obligate your wife from dwelling in the sukkah. You have to dwell in the sukkah, and the fact is your wife is not obligated to. She's not going to be responsible to dwell in the sukkah. She's allowed to dwell in the sukkah. She can sleep there. And the ideal way to have a sukkah is to have room for a husband and wife to dwell in the sukkah. And it there would be nothing wrong with that. Fine, be kosher, it would be the right way to do it. But nevertheless, the woman is not going to be obligated. We have halacha l'Moshe Sinai that says that a woman is exempt. Now, based on this Gemara, the Ramah in Shulchan Aruch says, do you know why many people don't sleep in the sukkah? Because their wife is not there. And because their wife is not sleeping in the sukkah, this is a reason, probably a good reason why people don't do this. In other words, even though, of course, it's ideal for people to sleep in the sukkah, according to Shulchan Aruch, it's pretty clear that you should. Even in the Gemara and Shulchan Aruch, it seems very clear a person should sleep in the sukkah. The fact is, a person, his wife is not in the sukkah, with him, because most people don't have sukkahs that are that large that they'll have a private room in the sukkah to be with their wife. And because of that, there would be an exemption to that they're uncomfortable not being able to mitzvah that they're not with their spouse. Therefore, they're allowed to sleep in the house. So that would be a heter for a married person to not sleep in the sukkah. Now, it doesn't give a heter for a single person. That you need to rely on other heter. But the heter for a married person would be that this is a heter. Again, there's many married people that sleep in the sukkah. But this would be a heter based on this Gemara. Again, the Gemara is not talking about you not sleeping in the sukkah because of it. The Gemara was looking at it the opposite way. Maybe we should obligate the woman to sleep in the sukkah because you have to dwell in the sukkah properly. The Gemara is implying, well, that would mean that maybe the woman has an obligation, even though women are normally exempt because it's a time-limited mitzvah, and you would think that a woman should be obligated anyway because you have to dwell in the sukkah the way you dwell in your house. Nevertheless, the halacha l'maisha b'sina says a woman is exempt. She doesn't have to sleep in the sukkah. She doesn't have to sleep in the sukkah. So now, if I sleep in the sukkah and she's sleeping in the house, I'm mitzvah. So now I have a heter not to sleep. I have a leniency not to sleep in the sukkah. I can go in the house and go to sleep. Now, what happens if she is in the middle of she's impure, she's menstruating, or she didn't go to mikveh yet, and because of that, we anyway can't sleep together. Nevertheless, I can sleep in the same room. Sleep together, sleep in the same room. And that's the comfort of a husband and wife to sleep together in the same room. And so still, there's a heter, you can go in the house. You don't have to sit. This would be the leniency of the Ramah is not limited to because they're going to have relations. It's because it's simply to sleep together with one spouse. You sleep together. That's the normal way in the house. That's how you feel comfortable sleeping with your spouse. And that would be a heter to not sleep in the sukkah. Of course, there's other heterim as well that it's uncomfortable because it's cold out, or it's not so safe, or not the mosquitoes, or whatever. There's numerous other heterim. I'm not not saying that there aren't other heterim, but this is a heter mentioned that's brought down. Okay, Rava says that Yitzchok, we need it to tell us this. We need it to tell us that women are exempt from a sukkah. Salka daitach amina, I would have thought, it would have gone up in my mind. Salka daitach, it would have gone up in your mind, amina, to say, Yalef chamisha asar michag hamatzos, that we should learn the fact that it says the 15th day of the month of Tishrei, and it speaks about the 15th day of the month of Nisan, and it says both of those words, chamisha asar. The Gemara says there's a gzeira shava, that we do learn one from the other. We spoke about this already. It came up before that there's a gzeira shava. Yalef, we learn chamisha asar. It's called. It says 15 here and it says 15 there. It's called the gzeira shava. There's a word here where it says it in this law, the law of Sukkah. There's a word there where it says in the laws of Pesach. So you would think that we learn from Pesach, Michag hamatzos, mala halon, just like over there, Nashim chayovos, women are obligated in eating matzah on Pesach. Afkan nashim chayovos. So I would say maybe women here also are obligated. That's part of the gzeira shava. Kamash Malana comes and lets us hear that that's not true. Women are not obligated in dwelling in the sukkah because why? Halacha l'maisha misinai. Halacha l'maisha misinai exempts a woman from dwelling in the sukkah, even though she should be obligated. Why would you think she's obligated? So Abai says a woman should be obligated because Teshu came to Duru. Because the husband has to dwell in sukkah, then the woman also should dwell in sukkah. Rava says no, the husband, the wife, you would think is obligated because if the wife has to eat matzah on Pesach, so she has to eat in the sukkah on sukkahs. It's a gzeira shava. There's a teaching that we compare the laws, and if she would be obligated there, she'd be obligated here. Hashem told Moshe, it's Sinai, Moshe, women are exempt from the sukkah. Okay, we're gonna stop here. Zai gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi Yeshua.